but contagion theory, in a nutshell, seeks to explain networks as conduits for infectious attitudes and behavior. It's one of the theories that is, I think it started gaining currency in the mid-60s, and a lot of communication theorists and communication philosophers concentrate on it. The wildly successful AMC television show, The Walking Dead, has managed to cast yet another eerie shadow on the authority of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that is the CDC. The US federal agency designed to monitor and improve national public health by controlling and, if possible, preventing the spread of diseases. I'm not interested in The Walking Dead, nor do I plan to engage zombies in my talk on Othello and Contagion, but I bring it up to draw attention to a transhistorical discursive characteristic of narratives of disease that mobilize conventions of horror to impress upon their audience the state of emergency produced by the mobility of infection, the spreading of diseases, which results from processes of globalization and miscegenation, which is the mixing of two or more kinds, causes simultaneously an unplanned and often dangerous transformation of society. So, for example, in their hugely influential text, Empire, Antonio Negri and Michael Hart observed that the age of globalization is synonymous with the age of contagion. They argue that increased encounters with the other and the growing porosity of national borders that marks globalization have heightened our anxieties about the spread of disease and corruption. The right, too, adopts the logic of the epidemic in its engagement with globalization. All too recently, political leaders of the First World have noted the grave danger or threat posed to the national economies and identities of the UK and the US by the invasive global other. As we were reminded yet again this year, elections are won and lost on the basis of contagious stories of globalization. Indeed, it is the story told about transmission that informs both the power of contagion and the spread of infection. In most presentations of social infection, it is even difficult to tell apart the medium from the virus, as Tony Sampson notes. Sampson offers the example of former CIA operative Robert Baer's liberal use of the contamination metaphor in his discussion of the spread of Islamic terrorism.
This is an enemy that's going to be around for a long time. It's a virus that's going to be very difficult to kill because it's going to pop up in different parts of the world.
Baer's rhetoric is designed to spread anxiety, so it is no surprise that his language is embedded in tropes of chaos and disease. But the rhetoric of contagion is not limited to the spreading of the feeling of fear. In fact, although feeling fear seems to be endemic to recent politically motivated contaminations of a population, there are other much overlooked affects like love, which are equally catching, and that's part of what I'll talk about. I'm interested in the ways in which feelings of love and fear are generated or heightened in Othello through the rhetoric of contagion and infection. So love is a critical ingredient in Othello's relations with diverse characters in the play. It should come as no surprise that in a story about love gone horribly wrong, the word love, in its various combinations, features prominently in the play. Othello refers to diverse forms and affects of love the most, using the word itself, the word love, 24 times. Othello first connects love, and he's the first one to do so, connects love with contagion and narrative early in the play, when he defends himself against his father-in-law Brabantio's literal charges of performing witchcraft on Desdemona, that's the wife, by drawing attention to the magical powers of language to transmit love through the phenomenon Sampson would call, or Tony Sampson would call, empathic virality. I will a round unvarnished tale deliver, states Othello, of my whole course of love, what drugs, what charms, what conjuration, and what mighty magic I won his daughter. For Brabantio, witchcraft is is a vehicle or medium of infection, one that enables the disease that is Othello to take over and corrupt the natural faculties of Desdemona's healthy and otherwise wholesome being. For Othello, on the other hand, the most potent source of contagion is language, in that he uses it to win the love of others. Not only did he manage to win him Desdemona's love, it also earns him, not only did it manage to win him Desdemona's love, it also earns him the Duke's empathy. The Duke is the king figure in the play, the most powerful political figure, who in turn imagines his own daughter's positive response to Othello's contagion. So he's saying, oh my God, after hearing this story, I totally don't blame Desdemona, because even my daughter would have been contaminated and been in love with this black man, right? So not anyone's fault if they're taken in. In fact, as Othello recalls his early history in Venice, it is Brabantio who is among the first to love him for his stories, thus allowing contagion to have its day. Lest the connection of contagion and love sweep us up uncritically in the construction of a hastily imagined affective network of feeling good or feeling happy, it is crucial that we heed Bruce Magnuson's and Zahi Zalua's warning about the flexibility of the semantics and semiotics of contagion. Contagion as such, they argue, is to be neither celebrated nor condemned out of hand. Rather, we need to imagine how the concept operates in a given system and fully explore its interpretive potential. Because of its potential to expose a being to the effects of alien agency, in many contexts, contagion might be understood as infection. Because of its potential to expose a being to the effects of alien agency, in many contexts, contagion might be understood as infection. But as Eugene Thacker notes, and I quote, despite distinctions between the two, both contagion and infection are entire wars and invasions continuously fought on the battle lines of the human. In Othello, stories of contagion, that is love, and stories of infection, that is jealousy and other state-organized apparatuses of emergency, follow dangerously similar discursive paths that overlap at times and, in the end, lead to multiple fatalities. The horror of infection is rampant in the language of the play. Chiefly it is Iago who mobilizes the anxiety through his allusions and metaphorical references to disease. His particular obsession is with the catching powers of the plague, a disease that was, of course, a real and present threat to the early modern audience of the play. So not only would the first audiences of Othello have had family and friends who died of plague or were dying of plague while they were at the theatre, they would have been constantly alert to these alarm sounds, right? In the middle of a play, the alarm would go off because the king or the Privy Council would have just put a ban on theatres, because even though the people didn't know what was causing plague, they had figured out that if people got together in hordes in confined spaces, that made the disease far more potent and powerful. So they would shut down playhouses. So even when they're hearing the word plague on stage, it is triggering a sense of anxiety, right? I mean, talk about contagion and a very smart use of the word. Iago even confesses to being a victim of the plague of jealousy, with which, in turn, he infects Othello. And I quote without showing you. I confess it is my nature's plague to spy into abuses, and oft my jealousy shapes faults that are not. He literally says that, and yet everyone's like, oh, okay. But it isn't jealousy alone that Iago manages to spread by means of the story he tells of its infective potential. Early in the play, Iago conjures up images of material and bodily contamination in order to transform Brabantio's vision of his peaceful household and fertile climate into a dangerous space pried open by an invisible and debilitating force of disease. He prompts Rodrigo, who is like this loser, slightly douchey, stalkery lover figure, right? Who's trying to get in Desdemona's pants, but is being prohibited by multiple people, eventually by the fact that Desdemona marries Othello. Well, not eventually, immediately as the play starts. So Iago prompts Rodrigo to appeal to the father's fear of infection and biological damage when he advises him to, quote, poison and plague him with flies. Rodrigo turns out to be the perfect medium, for his language enables the rapid multiplication of Brabantio's fears about the loss of his personhood through uncontrolled and uncontrollable spreading, very much like the contagion at the very end up there. In Untimely Peace, Othello, the war machine, has completely and successfully been co-opted into the service of the state. State-propagated infection has done its worst, we might say. No longer does he present himself to the men as an outsider with a singular traveller's history, but rather as one who embodies them, who represents and in turn is represented by them. His experiences of the cannibals that each other eat are distant episodes in a history replaced by his present sense of self as a man who feels Christian shame at the sight of a barbarous brawl. His own sense of civil shame, that is, his newfound sense of place, empowers him to shame his soldiers for their breach of conduct when he poses what must seem to them a series of rhetorical questions. So what has happened is that Cassio, under the influence of Iago's taunting, flirtatious rhetoric, has started drinking, only he can't hold his liquor. Other people have gotten drunk, and the result is Cassio and Rodrigo start a big fight, and it just turns shady. It's happening at an especially inconvenient moment where possibly Othello and Desdemona are finally going to consummate their relationship, and it's aborted because this bar brawl, as it were, kicks in, right? So he's really pissed off with all these guys, and he says, "Are we turned Turks, and to ourselves do that which heaven hath forbid the Ottomites?" Othello chastises his soldiers for sacrificing their sense of Christian politeness to a raucous spirit of pleasure, which he has learned from the best in Venice is neither polite nor Christian. Notably, his acquisition of politeness is a sign of infection. He is infected by Venetian and Christian sensibility. Both Elaine Scarry and Pierre Bourdieu draw attention to the entrenched nature of politeness and claim the presence of learned culture in the body is sometimes described as an imposition originating from without. So it usually is an infection that once we are cultured, we have been diseased in some way. The words polis and polite are, as Bourdieu reminds us, etymologically related, and the concessions of politeness always contain political concessions. Remarkably, Othello's rage at his subordinates' impoliteness and disobedience of his order of discretion even leads him to mobilize an authoritarian language that mimics or is infected by the rhetoric of the senators and the duke in Venice. Brabantio's smug declaration to Rodrigo in Act 1, Scene 1, that his house is not a grange, finds a close parallel in Othello's reprimanding words to his officers who, quote, fright the isle from their propriety and from its operation of common sense. If, as Deleuze and Guattari suggest, common sense, the unity of all the faculties at the centre, is the state consensus raised to the absolute, then Othello presents himself as the state when he manages to subordinate his passion to, quote, the safer guides of his reason and best judgment. The more you obey, and this is Deleuze and Guattari, again not here, the more you obey, the more you will be master, for you will only be obeying pure reason, in other words, yourself. Obedience is infectious, especially if the state presents its own obedience of the law as an organic measure of its competency. So obedience then becomes part of a body that is larger than the state and that is embedded within an assemblage of manners. Manners, Bourdieu claims, and I'm quoting now, are placed beyond the grasp of consciousness and hence cannot be touched by voluntary, deliberate transformation, cannot even be made explicit. Nothing seems more ineffable, more incommunicable, more inimitable, and therefore more precious than the values given body, made body by the transubstantiation achieved by the hidden pedagogy, capable of instilling a whole cosmology, an ethic, a metaphysic, a political philosophy through injunctions as stand up straight or don't hold your knife in your left hand. But of course, Manners are learned. The trick is in making them look and feel natural, commonsensical, like they are a universal condition we've bust out of the mother's womb knowing. With the unmannerly Cassio's dismissal from Othello's service, Iago embraces the role of medium and promises to educate the Moor in the secrets of true Venetian culture, something everyone who's from Venice must already know, but that Othello must study and imitate. I know our country disposition well, Iago states, before declaring the truth about native wives. In Venice, they let God see the pranks they dare not show their husbands. All of Venice's women are infected with the condition of unchastity, Iago makes clear. Despite Othello's repositioning of himself in Cyprus as a convincing guardian and representative of the Venetian state, he betrays his vulnerability as one unfamiliar with its everyday practices, particularly in its domestic context of marriage. Thus, in response to Iago's vulgar education about Desdemona's potentiality as a source of sexual infidelity, Othello simply asks, "Dost thou think so?" Whatever Othello's anxieties may be about his marriage, in Venice he referred to his partnership with her as one that is, quote, free and bounteous, unconfined by contemporary conventions of marriage. But guided by his ancient's tutelage, in peacetime Cyprus, he ponders the condition of men's cuckoldry within marriage using the familiar language of epidemic. So this is the top one is what I'm talking about, and I'll end with the last one. "'Tis the plague of great ones, and is unshunnable like death." He notes, even as he accepts the disease as the forked plague that is fated to us when we do quicken. When we do quicken is not simply when we are born, but when we feel horny. So every time you want to have sex, you are participating in some sort of plague. Just remember that. Clearly, this is language Othello's picked up from Iago, who alludes to the infectious nature of cuckoldry when he reminds Othello of Desdemona's history of betraying men. She did deceive her father, marrying you. While the purpose of its use need not always be physical or social manipulation, the languages of infection, disease, and contagion predominantly serve as markers of threats to the body politic, the nation, and the essential normative function or infrastructure of global life. The languages also serve as reminders of the body's simultaneous situatedness and openness to motility. While Othello's paradoxical condition in the play does not attest to Elaine Scarry's claim that what is remembered in the body is well remembered, surely his vacillations between contagion and infection suggest that, quote, "It is not possible to undo the memory of antibodies or self-replication without directly entering, altering, injuring the body itself." Othello's words to Iago about his recollection of his wife's betrayal of his love, "Oh, it comes o'er my memory as doth the raven or the infectious house, boding to all," anticipate painfully his penultimate speech in the play, the final story of his past and of his death, with which he hopes to contaminate Venetian senses and woo them back into a condition of empathic love.